Well, hello. Thank you for joining us for our monthly tips in 10 minutes. We're so happy to have you both here. We have Tasha and Marti, both from OSU Wexner Medical Center, and I'd like for each of you to introduce yourselves. Marti, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure, thank you. I'm Marty, and I run point on the advancement communications for the Wexner Medical Center. So, how do we reach donors, and then how do we communicate with them after we've had a chance to capture their attention and all of everything in between?
Yes, not an easy job. So thank you for taking time out to chat with us today. How about you, Tasha?
Yeah, Tasha Thomas. I am Director of Individual Giving and Analytics for the Medical Center Advancement Team. So we are the people responsible for annual giving, outreach, getting people to engage with us as donors. We manage that program for the Medical Center, including our grateful patient population, the James Cancer Hospital, and our 6 health science colleges.
Yeah, well, good. Well, thank you again for joining us. One of the things that Tasha and I were talking about recently is this notion of all of philanthropy or foundations or development within organizations is often very siloed. It's tough to kind of centralize those efforts when you have annual giving and the grateful patient programs and your own employee, initiatives around giving and individual donors and corporate. You guys know more about that world than I do. And you started to share with me some things that you've done, both of you have done together within your department to really break down those silos. So, Marti, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done, or Tasha, one of you kick us off with that, like one or two things in the last year? Because I know you've been doing things for a while, but what kind of rises to the top is like these two things have really made a difference in breaking down some of those walls?
I think the first thing for us is really how we've come together in our planning stage to be cohesive around audiences instead of around our teams. So
Oh,
our
great. Yeah.
teams all have our expertise or our goal. But when we think about someone who might be very passionate about breast cancer research and the impact of that on the disease overall, then we can better think about they want to hear from us that the donations that come in our door are making an impact on how do we, detect, prevent, treat breast cancer innovatively.
Mhm.
And then when they hear from us with an appeal, hopefully they have that impact message or story in the back of their head because we've already delivered it. So it's more about thinking how the audience would make sense of what we're telling them versus how we would really approach it from our own goals. And so from a fiscal year planning standpoint down to a content calendar standpoint, we've brought the teams together to work on it in that capacity instead of in just team by team.
And I'm curious, just as a follow-up to that, like how do you curate or identify what those interests are? I mean, when you think about we start with the audience in mind, so how do you know what they're interested in? I mean, is it just based on past behavior, patient encounters? Like what data are you using to identify that? And maybe Tasha, you have some thoughts about that. You're in the analytics side, so
Yeah, I can take that. Both sided to your point. When we're
yeah.
talking about acquiring new donors, it's kind
Mhm.
of like where have they been interacting with us throughout the medical center, and that kind of gives us clues to what their interests might be. Where have they been seen? What service areas have they experienced? And then in the donor population, they've already told us what their passion is by giving and supporting something. So they're telling us what they're passionate about, and we want to encourage that and be able to show the impact for their gift. So it's both sides.
Okay. And then you are able to bring um, your teams together and organize around these different
Mhm.
kind of audience segments and what their interests are. Okay.
Yeah,
That's,
we've
yeah.
kind of broken down the silos to like, the engagement, the cultivation, the solicitation, and the stewardship. And so all of those teams coming together and thinking about an audience, and where are we touching them throughout the year, and how are we impacting them, and how are we ensuring that, our communications are timed appropriately to kind of keep that interest level high. So we
And
don't
have you
just make
found that it's
millions.
working? I mean, what kind of like data are you looking at to know that it's making a difference? I mean, I think
Uh,
operationally you might feel that, right? Like internally you're like, okay,
mhm.
there's not so much, so much silos, but like from a user experience, are you experiencing some
Yeah,
benefits?
better donor numbers, more
Yeah.
people renewing, and coming back year after year and not seeing declines there, I think is the best indicator that we have.
Yeah. That's great. So what would you suggest? I mean, knowing that our audience also are healthcare marketers, many of them are in similar roles as the two of you. What would you suggest or recommend that they can do to move towards a more centralized shared effort like you've just described? I mean, even down to like record keeping and collateral keeping and all the initiatives and efforts. How have you guys been able to do that?
You want me to start that one? It's not so much that we're perfect at it, but we're taking the steps to get better. Sharing our resources and the things that are already being produced. I found in annual giving that other teams are producing wonderful things for donors that I'd never seen before
Right.
because it's in the major gift space or, in a different area. And somebody had already done all this work and gathered all this information and made this great piece. Well, once that's been presented to the place that it was made, then can I reuse that?
Mhm.
And some of that information. So purposefully breaking down those barriers and thinking about trying to get other people to think about everybody across the team and their work. And so we don't just produce something for a one-off, but how can this be used 3 times
Yeah.
to
Create
make the
once,
effort worth it?
publish everywhere. Yeah. So
Yeah.
in its most simplistic form, like how do you do that? Do you guys have like a centralized
Marti is the
library? Like
person.
how do you get access to these things so that everyone can use them?
Mhm.
Well, we've tried a few things and we keep trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out what is the best, tool. We've tried, we use Workfront, we use Airtable, we have Trello boards, we have specific Microsoft Teams. We do our fair share of spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But people remember stories more than spreadsheets, as you and your team know
Mm-hmm.
better than anybody. So one of the things that I have tried to focus on is to think about what do we want our teams to change or do differently internally. If I want everybody to make it a priority to always know the most recent story that's been published on the medical center, news site, then I have to think of a way to bring that into our team meetings. Maybe we start with that every time, or maybe we do a quiz
Yeah.
about, did anybody read that this week? Or maybe the team each has to take a turn each week presenting to the rest of their teammates what they read and learned on our own site, and it builds in a habit of our teams sort of consuming our own
Yeah.
storytelling because there's too much across
Yes.
medical
Yeah.
center and all the health science colleges and all of that for any one person to captain our
Yeah.
content. So
Yeah.
I think it's about creating appetite internally, and of course everything you use to create appetite internally you can use to create appetite
I love
externally too.
that. Yeah, it is. It's like consuming your own content. I love that. And creating an appetite and a discipline around sharing, those stories so that there's a focus and it's something that you're always expecting and you're always prepared to do. And then, consuming that so that you're prepared to also use it in your own efforts. Those are great, great examples. And have you found that, your team as like they've been able to do this and tap into this, that it's saving you time, everyone's more efficient? Does it create a more like consistent donor experience because they're not maybe not getting the same thing from different people or areas?
Yes, I think we're in the baby stages of that, but we're seeing, positive progress. And so the one example that comes to mind is we have Day of Giving coming up, and
Mhm.
University-wide Day of Giving, and this is what the medical center is featuring. And so we on the stewardship side have an impact report ready to go for a certain pipeline, but we're also featuring that in Day of Giving. So by sharing the information and each other knowing what we're doing, we were able to kind of, hey, let's hold this until after Day of Giving so we can capture all those new donors, and
Yeah.
then we have immediate impact ready to go instead of sending it a month before and then being like, asking Marty to go make me something else.
Yeah.
So just that timing and thinking of the audiences and where does that natural fit. We, just make a tiny adjustment that makes everybody's lives better.
I think the fact that you guys have identified your internal audience as an audience, like that's what's really important. Like you were saying, we have to share the stories and the content internally and make sure we're doing that, effectively and frequently. I think that's a really key learning there. I love that idea. And you said Trello boards and Teams channels or whatever. So you're using all of them. Is there one that you would suggest to our, viewers? Like this is really what we have found to work best.
We created one channel on Teams that we call like our donor story portal.
Okay.
And it's kind of
Yeah.
like when you come across a piece of information or you come across a story or a posting, people
Yeah.
just like naturally add that there, and it creates a natural spreadsheet for us of like,
Yeah.
hey, what about this for this? And so it's just a repository of a place to keep
Yeah.
things. But when we need an idea, we can go back to that and kind of scroll through and look, and it's all there.
Yeah. That's great.
Mhm.
I love that.
And I think too that,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I would love to hear what you have to say.
I was just going to say, I think it helps build on the notion of an internal culture of, in our case, philanthropy,
Yes.
but it could be internal
Yeah.
culture, whatever your focus is, right? Because when our audiences across all of our internal groups are hearing consistent and similar emphasis on philanthropy and philanthropic messaging and focus on the impact of what gifts are doing, then they realize it's not just that email they read 2 weeks ago or just somebody, pet project. They realize that it is something they're hearing consistently.
Mhm.
And we're as humans, we're motivated by what gets rewarded. We pay attention to that. We're looking to see, well, who gets on stage at the big meetings and who's being quoted in the blog, and so if those things are separate from what you want your internal culture to be, then you're going to have an issue. But if you're actually featuring and highlighting and rewarding the things that you're focusing on, that's really where it comes together.
No, I think that's so smart. And it's so energizing too, right? I mean, we're rallying together. We have a shared interest, to advance the institution, and we all have the same goals in mind. And the fact that you're finding ways to build that culture internally and continue to really inspire and create that energy is really cool. What about one other thing, Tasha, and then I think we're at our 10 minutes, but we had talked a little bit about, you were like, it's really important that we close the feedback loop. I remember you said something about that, and I want to hear a little bit more about that as our last kind of closing comments. And I think you were talking about how do we share how the effects and outcomes of our work?
Yeah, we've noticed kind of starting these conversations that we never, as annual giving in particular, we never shared the results back. And so circling back to Marti's team and being like, hey, you guys worked on this campaign and this is how successful it was, and celebrating across the team instead of just like this was an annual giving success. This was actually, an advancement team success. So with our internal partners, it's been huge.
Yeah.
Our data science people and business intelligence that help us gather all the audience information and create the lists, they would never see the finished piece of what they were, pulling. And so like closing that loop, and that has helped culture immensely as well.
Yeah. And with your partners too, like being able to close the loop with them and how those stories and the work that they're doing to support that. So, well, I love I think starting with your audience, and finding ways to get really creative about that and do that and create discipline and focus. And that then informs and drives everything else. That sort of internal culture, I think that's a real good takeaway. And being really good about sharing feedback, then you reinforce what's working and let's do more of that. So I think those are all really great tips. And I really appreciate both of you spending 10 minutes with me and passing those along. And if you're both open to it, I'll leave your contact information. And when we share this, if anyone has any comments or questions, they can reach out to you both.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Take care.